Chapter 1. The bell at Marleycombe Hall that morning of the Marleycombe Spring Fair broke bright and dry, as though the heavens themselves were eager for the day's spectacle. Along the winding lanes of the village, a hamlet so tucked into the folds of Dorsetshire that one might mistake it for a dream, bunting fluttered like cheerful gossip, and the scent of scones drifted on the breeze. By 10 o'clock, the green was alive with children clutching painted wooden ducks, dogs yapping at one another's leashes, and old ladies discussing rhubarb in near whispers that somehow carried across the crowd. The brass band tuned its instruments near the war memorial, and behind the churchyard, stalls groaned under jars of marmalade, handmade soaps, and second-hand mysteries with dog-eared spines. No one, not even the Reverend Charles Fielding, who prided himself on sensing the subtle disturbances of the soul, could have predicted what would occur by tea-time. It was just past noon when the bell at Marleycombe Hall began to toll. That in itself was peculiar. The great bell above the main staircase hadn't rung in years, not since the last of the Fishers family, Sir Horace, had passed away, and the manor had been leased to an artist of dubious reputation and even stranger interior tastes. It was an old-fashioned bell, pulled with a rope from the central hallway, used once upon a time to summon servants. But there were no servants now, and yet the bell rang once, then twice, then once more. A slow, dragging toll. Several villagers turned toward the sound with frowns. A few smiled nervously, assuming some theatrical flair by the eccentric new tenant. But by the fifth toll, the music had stopped. People were listening. Mrs. Tansley, who ran the post office and had a nose for calamity, set off at once toward the hall. She wasn't alone. The crowd that arrived 15 minutes later would forever remember the way the front door hung open, just slightly, as if it had been left ajar by a departing soul. Inside the vast foyer, the air was strangely cold. Sunlight pooled weakly on the tiled floor, and at the foot of the grand staircase, half slumped against the banister, lay the body of Eleanor Wright. She had been the guest of honor that day, invited back to Marleycombe after a decade's absence. In her youth, she'd been the village's brightest star, a pianist of considerable promise, with cheekbones that made young men forget their names and old women mutter about vanity. But she'd vanished suddenly at 24, left for Paris, then Munich, then nothing, until last month when she returned, unannounced, unexplained. Her return had lit the village ablaze with curiosity. She was staying at Marleycombe Hall, having taken a lease for 6 months. Alone, except for a part-time housekeeper and the occasional pianist friend who dropped in from London. Now she was dead. Her neck lay at an unnatural angle, and one slipper was still clinging to the third step, as if it had tried to hold her. Stairs behind her curved upward with balletic elegance, rising and rising into shadow. Some villagers later would swear she hadn't fallen, that it was too neat, that someone had placed her there. Inspector Garrick Hanley arrived within the hour, all salt and pepper mustache and clipped vowels. He set to work in brisk fashion, examining the body, barking orders, and scribbling in his notebook. Most assumed the cause was clear. A fall. Tragic, yes, but accidental. And yet something troubled Hanley. The expression on Eleanor's face. Not fear, not surprise, but something closer to confusion. Or disappointment. No one called it murder. Not yet. That call came 2 days later from a man who arrived not by police car or village taxi, but on foot, with an umbrella in one hand and a battered leather valise in the other. He introduced himself to Inspector Hanley in the garden of the Yonne, Rose and Thistle pub, where the inspector had taken to having his late lunch. "I hope you'll forgive the interruption," the man said, his accent syrupy southern and soft as a lullaby. "But I believe a tragedy has occurred in your fine village." One eye may be of use in untangling. Hanley frowned. And you are? My name is Benoit Blanc. Chapter 2. A village of whispered things. If Marleycombe had a signature scent, it was wood smoke and lavender. In summer, the hedgerows grew thick with cow parsley and secrets. There were cottages with names like Foxglove Corner and Daisy Hollow. And every front door had either a brass knocker or a quiet story attached to it. 2 days after the fair, after the bell, after Eleanor Wright's death, the village was in a state of collective agitation that neither tea nor rhubarb gin could settle. It was an accident, said the vicar's wife at the butcher's. She was pushed, muttered the widow. Cartwright, who claimed she'd heard a scream, though no one else had. She fell, said the schoolteacher, brushing chalk dust from her coat. But why was the bell rung? Asked nearly everyone. There was no answer, only the echo of something left unfinished. Benoit Blanc had, for his part, installed himself in the spare room above Marleycombe's only bookshop, Pickwick and Pages. It was run by a quiet man named Hugh Linney, who had studied theology in Cambridge, and now spent his days alphabetizing Agatha Christie, paperbacks and offering unsolicited but poetic life advice to anyone who came in for a map or a murder mystery got blank. In his pressed cream suit and polished cane, seemed a curious visitor to the village. He did not pry, not at first. He strolled. He watched. He listened with great patience to conversations that never once mentioned him by name, but swirled nonetheless in his orbit. He noticed the children who no longer played near the hall, the baker who had taken down his tribute sign, the missing flowers from Eleanor's doorstep. He began with the hall. Marleycombe Hall stood at the edge of the village, where the trees grew thickest and the crows held dominion. Though once the ancestral home of the Ferrers family, it had taken on a new character in the years since its decline, now less Downton Abbey, more forgotten grandeur with peeling edges and mismatched furniture. The current owner, according to the village registry, was one Miss Cassandra Bloom, a sculptor known for assembling figures from broken glass and antique cutlery. She was in Greece at the time of Eleanor's death. The lease had been arranged by an agent in London. Everything legal. Everything tidy. But inside the hall, things told a different story. Inspector Hanley, who, despite his clipped manner, had agreed to allow Blanc access, gave him a brief tour. No sign of forced entry, Hanley said, gesturing toward the brass lock. Door was ajar when they found her, but not broken. No footprints on the tiles. Nothing stolen. No bruises. Scratches. Just a broken neck and a drop of blood. Blood? Asked Blanc softly. Small trace. On the staircase rail. Could be nothing. Could be from the fall. Blanc ran his fingers gently over the polished wood, eyes following the elegant spiral that rose into shadow above them. And this bell? He asked. Hanley nodded. Yes, that's the strange part. Rope's still there. Was pulled. No fingerprints. No one saw who did it. And Miss Wright? Blanc asked. She was seen alive that morning? She played piano at the fair. Briefly. Came alone. Left early. She told one of the stallholders she was tired. Went back here before 1 o'clock. Any visitors? Hanley flipped his notebook. Only one mentioned in the account so far. A man seen leaving by the back path around 2. Tall, wore a cap. No one saw his face. Could have been a delivery boy. Or someone else. Blanc stood at the foot of the staircase. The air here was cooler, stiller, the kind of silence that pressed. Gently on the skin, like a hand without weight. She would not have been ringing that bell, he said finally. Pardon? If she had fallen from above, she would not have rung it. And if she had rung it, Hanley crossed his arms. You think it was a signal? Blanc gave a small shrug, or a warning, or an invitation. Hanley exhaled through his nose, clearly unconvinced. Blank turned, cane tapping lightly. And the housekeeper? Names. Jeanette Mallory. Comes in 3 times a week. Found the body with the villagers. Said she hadn't seen anything strange the day before. Would you mind if I spoke with her? I've no objection. Though I warn you, everyone in this village has something to say, whether it's useful or not. Blank gave a quiet smile. That is often where the truth begins. Chapter 3. The housekeeper silenced Jeanette Mallory was a woman of formidable stillness. Not stiff, not cold, just still, in the way of trees that have endured many winters. She had been cleaning houses in Marleycombe for nearly 30 years and had, in that time, learned how to become invisible. She preferred things neat, silent, and above all, regular. Eleanor Wright, by contrast, had been none of those things. She agreed to meet Benoit Blanc on the back patio of the hall, the only place. She insisted that didn't feel wrong since Eleanor's death. The drawing room made her throat tighten. The hallway made her dizzy. And she wouldn't go near the stairs. Blanc brought her tea in a chipped Wedgwood cup he'd found in the pantry. She accepted it with a polite nod. I appreciate your time. Miss Mallory, he began, settling into a wicker chair that creaked under his weight. I understand this has been an unsettling few days. She gave a curt nod, then looked out toward the hedgerow. I'm not one for drama, Mr. Blank. I leave that to the village. I just want to get on with things. Of course. Still, a woman has died, unexpectedly. And I suspect you may have noticed things, little things, perhaps that others did not. She stirred her tea once. You mean gossip? No, ma'am. I mean truths that disguise themselves in the folds of daily life. She let out a long breath. Miss Wright was restless. That's what I'd call her. Always pacing. Always. Starting one thing before finishing another. One day she'd be moving furniture about. The next she wouldn't come out of her room until dark. She didn't like to be asked about her past. Or her family. Did she seem afraid? Jeanette's eyes narrowed. No, not afraid, but watched. As if something from long ago had followed her back. Blank tilted his head. She spoke of it? She didn't need to. She was always glancing at the upstairs windows. Locked her door from the inside, even when she was home alone. And did she have visitors? The housekeeper hesitated. Not many. A woman came once, tall, pale, foreign-looking. Spoke with an accent. They argued. I could hear it through the kitchen door. Then she left. When was this? 3 days before the fair. Anyone else? Jeanette sipped her tea, then wiped the rim with her thumb. There was a man. I never saw his face. Always came late when I was gone. But I found things. A second coffee cup. Mud on the back mat. A coat moved. And once a pressed flower on the piano. Blank leaned forward slightly. Do you remember what kind of flower? A violet, dried. He went quiet for a moment. Gaze fixed on the patio tiles. Then softly. And the day she died, did you notice anything unusual? Jeanette's fingers tightened slightly on the cup. I arrived after the bell rang. I saw the people running. I went in with them. Saw her on the stairs. Thought for a moment she was resting. Then I saw her face. She paused. There was something else, she added quietly. Something I didn't tell the police. Blank remained silent, waiting. When I stepped inside, I smelled smoke. Not a fire, not cigarettes. Something sharper, like something had been burned. Blanc's eyes narrowed. Burned? She nodded. I followed. The smell to the fireplace, in the drawing room. There were ashes there, new ones. Still warm. Any sign of what had been burned? Paper. Maybe a photograph. A few scraps. Couldn't read them. Blank sat back in his chair, letting the pieces shift in his mind. "Thank you, Miss Mallory. That may be more helpful than you think." She gave him a long look, then said, almost reluctantly, "She asked me something odd, 2 days before the fair." "Yes?" She asked if I'd ever seen a staircase that didn't end. Blank blinked. "What did you say?" I thought she was being poetic. I said all staircases end somewhere. She just smiled, but not like someone who agreed. Like someone who was keeping something to herself. Blank stood, cane tapping once on the tile. "That smile, Miss Mallory, would you call it relieved or afraid?" Jeanette thought for a long time. "Afraid," she said. "Most definitely afraid." Chapter 4. The Man with the Violin Case. The morning after his conversation with Jeanette Mallory, Benoit Blanc took a slow walk through the village square. The mist clung low to the rooftops like a held breath. Bakery doors swung open with the yeasty promise of morning loaves. A milk cart clattered by, trailed by a black and white cat who seemed to know all the shortcuts. But beneath the calm surface, Marleycombe was shifting. Blanc could feel it in the stairs that lingered too long, in the church bell that rang 2 minutes late. In the way, Mrs. Dobbs at the grocer's stopped talking altogether when he stepped inside. The death of Eleanor Wright had stirred something. Not just grief, though, that lingered in the corners, but a deeper sort of unease. As though her return had broken some unspoken pact of silence the village had long agreed upon. And then there was the man with the violin case. Blanc first heard of him from Hugh Linney, the bookshop owner, who had spent the previous afternoon dusting his chessboard collection and eavesdropping on customers. Saw him yesterday morning, Linney told Blanc without preamble. Tall, lanky sort, walked with a limp, carried a violin case, but I'd bet my Dickens first editions there wasn't a violin inside it. Blanc raised an eyebrow. "And why is that, Mr. Linney?" "Because when he set it down at the coffee stall, it made a sound like, I don't know, something heavier, something with corners." "And where did he go?" Linney squinted out the window, as if the man might still be passing. "Toward the hall, but not directly. Took the back lane, the one that runs behind the vicar's cottage, disappeared." Blanc thanked him and stepped back out into the cool morning light. The back lane was narrow, overgrown with nettles and brambles, the kind of path that knew how to keep secrets. He followed it slowly, noting footprints, some fresh, others blurred by dew. About 100 yards in, he found something curious. A strip of black cloth snagged on a low branch. He took a handkerchief and plucked it free. The cloth was fine, expensive. Wool, perhaps, torn at the edge. Just enough to suggest haste. He tucked it into his pocket. Marleycombe Hall loomed ahead now, its crooked windows staring out like tired eyes. But instead of approaching the front, Blanc turned left, toward the old gardener's shed. It had once belonged to the Ferrers' groundskeeper, a man named Alfred Neely, now 10 years dead. The shed was small, its door slightly ajar, and when Blanc stepped inside, the smell of damp wood and forgotten earth filled his nose. It was empty. Almost in the corner, half hidden beneath a cracked tarpaulin, was an old wooden chair. And resting on the chair, carefully placed as though waiting for someone to return, was a violin case. Blanc approached, heart steady, fingers sure. He opened the latch. Inside was not a violin. There were documents, folded neatly, some sealed with wax, a velvet pouch, and beneath it all, a photograph. Faded, torn at the edges. It showed Eleanor Wright, unmistakably younger, seated at a piano, her expression serene, eyes focused. Standing beside her, hand on her shoulder, was a man with high cheekbones, dark hair, and a mouth that seemed used to frowning. On the back, scrawled in a rushed, almost panicked hand, were 2 words. He knows. Blanc stared at the message for a long moment, before closing the case and tucking the photo into his inner pocket. When he emerged from the shed, the sun had broken through the mist, casting long shadows over the grass. From the lane behind him came a rustle. A bird? A branch? Or something more? He turned. Nothing. But for the first time since arriving in Marleycombe. Chapter 5. The Girl Who Ran Away Twice by Midweek. The village of Marleycombe was humming with theories. At the Rose and Thistle, a man who claimed to have once dated Eleanor Wright's cousin's friend insisted she had been working for the Secret Service. In the hairdresser's, two sisters argued over whether it was an ex-lover or a vengeful critic who had followed her back from Paris. And at the bakery, Mrs. Dansby swore Eleanor had confessed a desire to fake her own death, just for the attention. But Benoit Blanc was no closer to the truth, only closer to the feeling of it. It wasn't until he received a message, handwritten, slipped under the bookshop door, that things began to shift. If you want to know who Eleanor really was, meet me by the lake after dusk. Come alone. Don't trust the piano. There was no signature. Just a small violet, pressed flat between the folded page. Blanc turned it over, lips pursed. The same flower Jeanette Mallory had described. The same kind found in the photo inside the violin case. He arrived at the lake just before 9. There. Sky was a rich cobalt, the kind that seemed to hold its breath just before stars began to appear. The lake lay still, like a glass sheet laid carefully over the earth. Reeds whispered along the bank. A single heron lifted into the air and disappeared into the trees. He waited. At first, he heard only the lapping of water and the distant, rhythmic chirping of insects. Then, a crack of twigs, footsteps, uneven. She emerged from the shadows with a hood pulled up, eyes darting like a fox who's seen too many traps. She couldn't have been more than 22, 23. Straw-colored. Hair, freckles just visible above her cheekbones. An accent, when she finally spoke, that danced somewhere between Marleycombe and London. "I thought you might not come," she said. "They said you were clever, but clever people don't always listen." Blanc smiled gently. "I find it's wiser to listen before being clever." The girl bit her lip, glanced around. "I don't have long. They think I'm still at my aunt's." "And you are?" Rosie Fielding. Eleanor was my godmother. But most people don't know that. My mother kept it quiet after Eleanor, after she left. She left the village 10 years ago," Blanc said, without explanation. Rosie nodded. "She left because she saw something. Something in this village that frightened her. And then she came back. And now she's dead." Blanc studied her face. "What frightened her, Rosie?" The girl hesitated, then looked out at the lake. Her voice dropped. "Eleanor used to talk in riddles when I was little. I thought it was just her way. She said Marleycombe was built on quiet lies, that the hall was a place of mirrors where nothing was real, and that the staircase didn't go up or down, only inward." Blanc's brow furrowed. She mentioned the staircase to her housekeeper, said it didn't end. Rosie nodded again, more quickly now. "Because it doesn't. Not really. There's something beneath it. A passage, maybe. A room. She said she found it once, when she was a girl. And that what she saw there made her run away." "What did she see?" Rosie swallowed. "She never told me. Just that there was a man, someone who shouldn't have been there. Someone long thought dead." Blanc tilted his head. "And you believe this?" Rosie turned to him now, full on. Her eyes were wide, clear, and trembling. "I know it sounds mad, but I saw her 2 days before the fair. She looked different, not older, lighter, like someone who'd made peace with a decision, I think she planned to tell someone. Maybe. Everyone. But then she died. Rosie nodded slowly. Or she was silenced. Blanc was quiet a moment, listening not only to her words, but to the way the night breathed around them. Something was shifting, like the tightening of a violin string just before it snapped. "And what do you mean?" he asked gently. Don't trust the piano?" Rosie hesitated. She said once that if she ever died mysteriously, the truth wouldn't be in her diary or letters. It would be in the music. Blanc blinked. "The music?" She was composing again. "I heard it. I even recorded a few bars once when she wasn't looking." Rosie pulled a phone from her coat and tapped on a voice memo. A moment later, the sound of piano notes filled the night, a lilting melody. Then a sudden shift, discord, repetition. 5 notes, again and again. Blanc's eyes sharpened. "She played that at the fair," he murmured. "Just before she left." Rosie nodded. "She said it was a message, a code, said someone would understand it. Someone she trusted." "Do you?" "No," she said, "but I think you might." She handed him the phone, hesitated, then turned. "To leave, Rosie," he said softly. "You've told me more than most would dare." "Why?" She stopped. Her voice was a whisper. "Because I'm afraid I'll be next." Then she was gone, swallowed by the trees. Blanc stood alone, the notes still echoing from the phone in his hand. And for the first time, the melody made his spine stiffen, because it was not just a song. It was a cipher, and someone in Marleycombe was willing to kill to keep it unsolved. Chapter 6. The piano that lied the next morning. Marleycombe awoke beneath a sky the color of pewter. The rain held off, but the clouds sat low and thick, muting the light as if the day itself was unsure of its place in the story. Benoit Blanc arrived at Marleycombe Hall before the clock struck 8. He carried no notebook, no gloves, only a small tape recorder and the melody still playing in his mind. 5 notes, repeated, hesitated. F, G, F, A, E again. F, G, F, A, E. It wasn't a song. Not truly. It was a message with a rhythm too rigid for composition and too structured for emotion. It was deliberate. Designed. He stepped into the drawing room. The house was quieter now. Not the quiet of calm, but the hush of breath held in. Dread. The scent of lily had faded. Someone had removed the wilted arrangements that lined the windowsills. The piano, an old walnut broadwood, stood beneath. The bay window like a sentinel watching the village. Blanc sat before it. He placed the recorder on the lid, then pressed the first key. F, a hollow note rang out. He played the full pattern. Slowly, F, G, F, A, E, then again. On the third repetition, something clicked. It wasn't from the keys. It was from beneath them. Blanc stood and moved the piano slightly. It rolled with effort on its casters. On the side, nearly flush with the polished wood, was a slim seam. A barely visible line just beneath the keyboard. A drawer? He pressed gently. Nothing. Then, as his fingers grazed the F key again, not to play it, but to press it down and hold, the seam hopped open. A whisper of mechanics, and the panel released. Inside, wrapped in thick vellum and bound by red twine, lay a folded sheet of music. Nothing more. No documents. No confession. Just music. Blanc removed it carefully, unrolling the edges as if handling a piece of fragile history. It was Eleanor's hand. The same curved notes and urgent lines Rosie's recording had captured. But there were additions here. Scribbled markings along the margin. At first, they looked like musical instructions. Dim, writ, and so on. But closer inspection revealed a different purpose. They were coordinates, not of geography. Of time. There were dates, handwritten and out of order. The 3rd of February, 1998, to 4:11 p.m., The 15th of June, 2001, 9:46 a.m., 21. October 2015, 2:03 p.m. Each marked beside a specific bar. Notations too exact for emotion, too precise for improvisation. Like, Tai est Blank stood by the window now, holding the sheet in the flat light. Across the lawn, he saw a figure, Jeanette Mallory, again. She had arrived early. Perhaps to clean. Or to keep watch. He tapped on the glass and gestured. She entered moments later, brushing rain from her sleeves. "I wasn't expecting you," she said. "Again, I hope you don't mind." I needed to look at the piano. Jeanette's eyes flicked to the open drawer. "You found it then?" Blank paused. "You knew?" "I suspected. I've dusted that thing for 10 years, and always thought it sounded hollow. Eleanor said once, 'Every truth needs a hiding place that sings.' I didn't think it meant anything." Blank handed her the sheet. Did these dates mean anything? To her? She took it, blinked. She never said. But that last one. Jeanette's brow furrowed. October 2015. That was the day the hall was sold. To Cassandra Bloom? She nodded. Yes, the first time it left the Ferris family in 3 generations. Eleanor was furious about it. Said it was a mistake. A mistake, Blank repeated. Or a warning. Jeanette shook her head slowly. I think she believed the house remembered things, kept them, like it had its own kind of memory. Blank turned back to the piano, or its own kind of guilt. They stood in silence. Then Jeanette said something quiet. She told me once, when she was drunk, that someone had died here when she was young. A boy, that it was her fault. Blank turned sharply. Who? I don't know. She didn't say his name, just that he'd fallen. And no one believed her. A fall, Blank murmured. Down the staircase? Jeanette nodded. She said it happened at night. And the next morning, the staircase looked normal again. Like it had never happened. A lie covered up by architecture. A scream buried by years. He turned back to the piano. The melody was clearer now. Not music at all, but a confession. Chapter 7. The Boy Who Wasn't on Record. The Marleycombe Parish Registry was kept inside a narrow, wood-paneled room behind the church vestry, guarded by the scent of old books and the quiet, dignified anxiety of the Reverend Charles Fielding. A thin man with careful hands and a tendency to wring them, Fielding looked surprised when Benoit Blanc appeared at his door that afternoon. I suppose, said the Reverend as he led Blanc through, this is about Eleanor Wright. Blanc gave a small nod. It is, though, not in the way you might expect. Fielding opened a narrow drawer and removed a set of keys from a brass dish. I must admit, he added, I officiated her christening. That's how long I've been here. She was a luminous child, always watching, always listening. Blanc said nothing, his thoughts still caught in the folds of the piano sheet and the fragments of a name never spoken aloud. The parish registry was meticulous, a succession of leather-bound volumes lying neatly on the oak shelves, 1-4. Every decade since the late 1800s. Baptisms, deaths, marriages. But Blanc wasn't here for a life officially lived. He was here for the life that wasn't. You ever recall? He asked gently. A boy who died in Marleycombe, sometime in the late 1990s? Possibly in the hall itself. A child known to Eleanor Wright, perhaps related, but not listed publicly. Fielding's brow furrowed. There were no inquests from the hall, no deaths reported during that time. I'm quite certain. I'd remember. Blanc ran a hand along the cracked spines of the registry books. But is it possible a death wasn't reported? That's something. Tragic was kept quiet? The Reverend hesitated. In theory, yes. if the family had influence or shame, or both. Blanc tapped the shelf twice with his cane. Then perhaps we are not looking for a record of death, but a record of absence. They opened the 1995 to 2000 register and began combing through the baptismal records. Dozens of names. Familiar village surnames. The Larkins, the Trentwoods, the Mallory twins. Each child catalogued with careful ink strokes, and then they saw it. Right. Eleanor May, baptized March 1991. Next line. Right. Underscore entry struck through in red ink fielding narrowed his eyes. That's strange. Blanc took the book closer. The name had been crossed out, not scribbled, but lined through with precision, like something revoked. Can you see the name? Blanc asked. The Reverend tilted the book toward the light. Jeremy, he murmured. Jeremy Wright. No? Birth date? Blanc asked. None, which is ... quite odd. There's no entry of a death either. And this red ink? That's not mine, Fielding said. This was before my time as registrar. Blanc stared at the single, deliberate line. Someone had gone to great trouble to erase this child. But Eleanor hadn't. She had encoded his memory in music. As if she could not bear to say his name aloud, but could not bear to forget him either. Who was the vicar then? Blanc asked. Fielding thought. That would have been Reverend Mark. Levington, retired now, lives in Devon. Would he have kept copies? Fielding looked apologetic. Unlikely. He was known to travel light and forget often. Blanc nodded slowly, then straightened. Thank you, Reverend. This has been most helpful. As he made his way out into the overcast afternoon, the first raindrops beginning to fall, Blanc took a long path back toward the village green, deliberately passing Marleycombe Hall again. The windows were dark, the staircase silent. He looked once more at the upper rooms, at the window above the stairs, at the spot where, if a boy had fallen, his cry would have vanished in the silence and carpet. And then, through the low drizzle, he saw something. A flicker of movement in the topmost window. A figure stepping. Back into shadow, the housekeeper. Not rosy, taller, thinner, watching. He stood still? A trick of the light? Perhaps. But Benoit Blanc no longer believed in tricks. He believed in secrets. And someone, perhaps someone long thought gone, was watching to see just how much he'd discovered. Chapter 8. A Ghost in the Attic. Blanc returned to Marleycombe Hall. That evening, without ceremony. No Inspector Handley, no housekeeper, no villagers. He brought with him only a flashlight, a set of gloves, and the memory of a flicker in the top window. The hall, at twilight, felt like a ship adrift. Its walls creaked faintly in the wind. The garden paths were slick with recent rain, and the ivy along the brick glistened like something watching back. He let himself in with the key Handley had entrusted to him. Inside, the air was dry but dense. Each footstep echoed slightly longer than the last, as if the house was listening or remembering. He climbed the staircase slowly. There was something deeply unsettling about it, even without Eleanor's body at its base. The banister had a slight warp to it, barely perceptible, like a spiral that resisted being straightened. Each step seemed to stretch a bit farther than it should have at the landing. He turned left, toward the upper rooms. Most had been cleared when Cassandra Bloom leased the hall, dusty but unremarkable. But the last door at the end of the corridor, narrow and painted a dull gray, had not opened easily when he tested it before. Tonight, it opened with a reluctant groan. The attic room beyond was cramped, sloped-roofed, and cloaked in old dust. A single low window overlooked the back garden, and beneath it stood a worn chair, angled precisely, as if someone had indeed been sitting there, watching. Blanc stepped inside, shutting the door behind him. The smell hit him first. Old wood, cloth, something faintly metallic. He ran his hand along the wall and found a light switch. Nothing. He turned on his flashlight. Boxes lined one side of the attic, stacked in uneven columns, some marked with curling tape, others with labels so faded they were unreadable. But one, near the back, caught his eye. JW 1998, black ink. A child's handwriting. He knelt. Inside, a small red jumper, neatly folded, a toy soldier, a cassette tape, a broken watch, and a school report card, half torn, bearing the name Jeremy Wright, age 7, curious, bright, disruptive in music class. Blank turned it over. On the back, written faintly in pencil. He fell, but it wasn't his fault. It was mine. The handwriting was unmistakably Eleanor's. He exhaled slowly. The confirmation brought no satisfaction. Only weight. She had been carrying this memory all her life. A brother, hidden. A fall, erased. A guilt she had tried to bury in music and silence. But someone else had known. Someone who had gone to great lengths to keep Jeremy Wright's name forgotten. Even from the record. Blank stood and crossed to the window. From here, you could see the curve of the staircase through the inner glass below. It was the perfect vantage point. You could track anyone going up or down. A secret observer. A ghost of memory. And then a sound. Floorboards shifting. Not behind him. Below. Blank killed the light and listened. Silence returned, but the air had changed. He opened the attic door and stepped into the corridor. The house felt larger now, not in space, but in depth, as if it contained more past than present. He reached the stairs. A new envelope lay on the second step. Ivory paper. No seal, folded in half. He picked it up. Inside, a single sentence typed, "Leave this place. Some truths are not yours to reveal." No name, no signature, but at the bottom, faint and smudged, a fingerprint in dust from a left hand. Missing the smallest digit. Blank narrowed his eyes. He had seen that once before. In a war crimes tribunal. Years ago, an interpreter with a missing finger who had changed identities. That gesture, that absence, it stayed with him. There was someone in this village who had erased more than just names. And now, they were watching him from very close by. Chapter 9. The missing finger. The following morning, the rain returned. Soft, steady, insistent. It beat against Marleycomb's slate roofs and muddied its garden paths. It gave the whole village a feeling of hush and confinement, as if nature itself were waiting for something. Benoit Blanc sat beneath the awning of the rose and thistle, a lukewarm cup of coffee cooling at his elbow. Before him lay the letter from the staircase step, unfolded, uncreased, quietly threatening. "Leave this place. Some truths are not yours to reveal." Beside it, a magnified photograph Inspector Henley had agreed to provide, taken from Eleanor Wright's body at the time of discovery. There, in one corner of the image, visible on the lower banister, a print, smudged but distinct, a left hand. Missing the smallest finger. Blank had seen such a hand only once, in Marleycombe, and it belonged to a man named Walter Trentwood. Walter had lived at the edge of the village his entire life. A former wood-turner, he kept mostly to himself after. A fire had gutted his workshop 20 years ago. The local children called him Ghost Hand, not out of cruelty, but of superstition. He was rarely seen in daylight, never attended services, and when he did speak, it was slow, considered, and rarely friendly. But what made Blank curious wasn't Walter's missing finger. It was his connection to the hall. A connection very few people in Marleycombe seemed willing to talk about. He found Walter sitting on a stump behind his cottage, smoking a short pipe and staring at the woods. A black Labrador lay curled at his feet, Blanc tipped his hat. Mr. Trentwood, mind if I join you? Walter's eyes, surprisingly blue and sharp, flicked to him. You're the one asking questions. I am. He puffed once. Figures. Blanc sat on the edge of the stump opposite him. You used to work at the hall, Blanc said. Walter knew their house, he said simply. Didn't much care for the people. Did you know Eleanor Wright? Walter hesitated. Knew of her. Little girl with big eyes. Used to climb things she shouldn't. Blanc studied him. What about? Her brother? The pipe paused mid-her. There was no brother, Walter said flatly. Walter nodded. Said the boy was never registered. Claimed he was Eleanor's imaginary playmate to anyone who asked. The Ferrers were powerful then. Had connections. In the diocese. The vicar went along with it. And you? Walter looked down at his hand. At the place where a finger once had been. A week later I lost this, he said. Workbench accident. Never sure it was an accident. Blanc stared at him. And Eleanor? She vanished not long after. But before she left, she came. To me, said she was sorry. Said she was going to tell the truth someday. But she never did. She tried, didn't she? With that piano. That cursed house. But someone made sure her truth never got out. Blanc stood slowly. You know who did it. Walter didn't respond. But the look in his eyes said enough. She was getting close, Blanc said. Someone thought her memory was a threat. Maybe they followed her. Or maybe they never left. Walter stared into the trees again. I didn't push that boy, he whispered, but I watched him fall. And I've been falling ever since. Blanc left him there, beneath the gray sky, watching the past pass like fog through the trees. But in his pocket, he now carried something more than memory. He carried motive, because whoever had pushed Eleanor hadn't just wanted her dead. They wanted to erase Jeremy Wright again. And Benoit Blanc had no intention of letting them succeed. Chapter 10. The widow who spoke in riddles, the older villagers of Marleycombe, had long memories. But few wielded them with the sharp precision of widow Agnes Cartwright. She lived in a crooked stone cottage behind the chapel, where the walls leaned slightly, as if exhausted by their own history. Her garden was chaotic, with lavender and gooseberries. Her teapot, locals joked, never ran dry. Only stronger. Blanc found her seated in her sunroom, feeding crumbs to a canary named Abelard. She wore a mauve cardigan, a scarf that looked like it had been knitted in another century, and an expression that saw through most people in 2 seconds flat. You've come about Eleanor Wright, she said, even before Blanc had spoken. He smiled. You're very perceptive, madam. No, she replied briskly. I'm just old, which means I've lived through all this before. Blanc leaned forward. You believe this is not the first tragedy to haunt Marleycombe Hall. I know. It isn't. Agnes poured him tea without asking. There are places in this world that don't forget. That staircase is one of them. Tell me, Blanc said gently. What happened to Jeremy Wright? She blinked. So you found his name. Not many have, even fewer dare to speak it aloud. I believe Eleanor wanted the truth known, and I believe she paid for that desire with her life. Agnes didn't argue. She sipped her tea. He was 7, she said finally. Full of joy, that boy. Too much for a house like that. He loved games, loved hiding, but one day he hid too well. You were there? No, she said. But I was the one who saw her after. Eleanor. She came to me trembling, said he was gone. Sighed she couldn't find him. And yet, the village was told there was no brother. Sir Horace Ferrers made sure of that. He was a proud man. Didn't want his lineage associated with such imperfection. Imperfection? Agnes' jaw tightened. Jeremy wasn't like other children. He didn't sit still, didn't behave. There were whispers about doctors in London, but Eleanor adored him, protected him. And the family resented that. They resented him. He was a reminder that bloodlines don't guarantee grace. Blanc nodded slowly. Do you believe Eleanor blamed herself? Agnes looked at him sharply. She didn't push him, Mr. Blanc. Let's be clear about that. But she was the only one who loved him enough to grieve, and so she carried it. And what of Cassandra Bloom? Blanc asked suddenly. The woman who bought the hall. What do you know of her? Agnes narrowed her eyes. Now that is a question more people should be asking. Blanc sat up straighter. She was born Cassandra Ferrers, daughter of Horace's brother, Benedict. Changed her name after she was cut off from the family. Something about a scandal abroad. Came back under a new identity, sculptor, art dealer, bohemian nonsense, and bought the hall through an agency. She reclaimed the estate under a false name. Agnes nodded, poetic in a way. She always said the hall should have been hers. She hated Horace, blamed him for the family's decay. And for Jeremy, Blanc's voice dropped. Do you believe she killed Eleanor? Agnes was quiet a long time. I believe, she said carefully, that some people return not to heal wounds, but to reopen them. Blanc's tea had gone cold. He rose, cane in hand. Thank you, Mrs. Cartwright. You've given me more than you know. She looked up at him, eyes sharp as a hawk's. Be careful, Mr. Blanc. Cassandra has the blood of Marleycombe in her, and Marleycombe eats its own. Outside, the mist had returned. Blanc stood in the lane for a long moment, the wind tugging at his coat, the truth circling ever closer. Cassandra Bloom wasn't just a name on a deed. She was a Ferrers. She had motive, memory, and access, and perhaps she had always been watching. From the very top of that staircase, without end. Chapter 11. The sculptor's secret. Cassandra Bloom lived in a converted barn half a mile from Marleycombe's western edge, a modernist space of stone, glass, and steel that stood in severe contrast to the village's honeyed cottages and hedgerows. Locals rarely visited. She preferred it that way. Benoit Blanc arrived just before noon. The sun made a timid appearance, pale and watery, and the gravel under his shoes gave a crisp crunch as he approached the arched front door. She answered before he knocked. You're early, she said, stepping aside without invitation. I thought we might enjoy a civilized conversation, Blanc replied. Removing his hat. Her home smelled faintly of turpentine, lemon oil, and dried lavender. Sculptures in various stages of creation lined the walls. Rough torsos, faceless busts, an angelic figure with no arms. Large windows cast long shadows across a floor of polished cement. Cassandra was dressed in a navy linen tunic and trousers. Barefoot, her silver hair twisted up and held by a graphite pencil. There was something Greco-Roman about her, statuesque but emotionally unreadable. You've been asking about Eleanor, she said, walking toward a marble block near the hearth. And now, Jeremy? Blanc tilted his head. Then you remember. Jeremy? She began to chisel, gently, deliberately. He wasn't meant to exist. That's a cruel way to speak of a child. Cassandra shrugged. Cruelty has nothing to do with it. He was a liability, emotionally, politically, genealogically. Horace was embarrassed. Benedict, my father, was furious. Sighed Eleanor had broken the bloodline. That's the sort of thing our family said, you understand. Broken the bloodline. And what did you believe? I believed, she said, tapping lightly, that Jeremy was the first real person in that house. He wasn't molded or masked. He was. Too loud, too strange, too alive for their taste. And Eleanor protected him as long as she could. But not long enough. Cassandra's hand stopped. She set the chisel down, No, she said softly. Not long enough. Blanc moved to the window, looking out over the wild garden. You came back under a different name. You bought the hall through intermediaries. Why? She smiled thinly. To reclaim what was stolen. I was never meant to inherit anything, not as a woman. Not after my scandals, she looked at him. But I did. I bought it from beneath them, with art, not blood. It was glorious. And what did Eleanor think of your return? She hated it. Said the house didn't belong to either of us anymore. Said the staircase remembered. Blanc nodded. And yet you remained close, at least geographically. Proximity doesn't equal affection. She stayed away. Until she came back. And she planned to tell the truth, Blanc said, watching her closely. About Jeremy. About what? Really happened on those stairs. Cassandra didn't flinch. She said something to that effect. Yes. Did you kill her? She met his eyes, unblinking. No. You must understand that many of the signs point in your direction. I understand, she said calmly. But signs are rarely as honest as they appear. Blanc stepped toward the sculpture. The half-finished marble angel stood before him, and there, barely visible, was something curious. Etched into the base, in faint shallow strokes, was a name. Jeremy. Cassandra followed his gaze. I carved to remember, not to forget. But memory isn't always truthful, Blanc said. Sometimes we carve what we want to believe. Silence stretched between them. Finally, Cassandra said, Do you know what I remember most about that night? Blanc said nothing. I remember Eleanor screaming. Not when he fell. After. Not from fear, from betrayal. She said, You pushed him. I saw you. Blanc's breath caught. She said that? Yes, Cassandra said. But no one listened. Because they believed what Horace told them. That there was no boy. Who was she speaking to? Cassandra turned back to the sculpture. Not me. Then who? She ran a hand over the stone. Someone who disappeared, and should have stayed gone. Disappeared? Cassandra looked over her shoulder. There was another child in the hall, Benoit. A cousin, older, troubled. They said he went abroad after the fall. I never saw him again. A cold wind passed between them. Blanc's voice was hushed. Do you know his name? She nodded. Henry Ferrers. Blanc left the barn in a daze of unease. Henry Ferrers. A name never mentioned. A ghost not even Eleanor had encoded. In music. But someone with that name had returned to Marley Coombe. Chapter 12. The photograph in the orchard. The library at Marleycombe Hall had long been abandoned to dust. Its shelves held crumbling paperbacks, a few leather-bound ledgers, and more dust mites than knowledge. But the housekeeper, Jeanette Mallory, had told Blanc in passing that Eleanor spent a great deal of time there in her final months, particularly in the old reading nook beneath the gabled window that overlooked the orchard. Most people forget it's even there, Jeanette had said. She didn't like the main rooms anymore. Said they were stained, but she liked that window. It was just after 5 when Blanc returned to the hall, alone. The library door was stiff with age. He pushed it open slowly, the hinges complaining. Dust rose in little clouds as his shoes crossed the faded carpet. The reading nook was at the far end, a deep alcove in the stone wall with a cushioned bench and thick curtains, half moth-eaten, tied back with cords. A small oil lamp still stood on the sill, cold and empty, but what caught Blanc's attention was the panel just beneath the bench, slightly ajar. A crawl space, or more likely, a storage cavity. Inside, stacked tightly, were 3 thin boxes, each labeled in Eleanor's fine, deliberate script. Photographs, Ferrers family, 1960 to 1990 music sheets, drafts, private, letters, to Benoit Blanc. opened the first. Photographs, dozens of them. Some creased, some black and white. There was Sir Horace Ferrers, stone-faced beside a younger Benedict. A Christmas party in 1979. Eleanor as a child, posing stiffly with her parents. And then, one that stopped him, a boy, 13, maybe 14. Lean, hair dark and slicked back. A strange intensity in his eyes, standing apart from the others, as if either he had chosen distance, or they had, on the back. In Eleanor's handwriting, Henry minus 1989. Watch him. Blanc stared at the note. For a long moment, watch him, it wasn't affectionate. It was a warning. He turned to the second box, music sheets. Dozens of them. Most unfinished, bars left blank, notes abruptly halted mid-phrase. As if she had started and stopped again and again, unable to reach the end. One in particular stood out, the title simply, For Jay. It was a lullaby, gentle, slow, but halfway down the page, the melody fractured, descending into a discordant spiral. Then silence. The final measures had been torn away. Blanc placed the sheet aside and opened the third. Box. Letters. Dozens, many opened and resealed. All addressed from Eleanor, none to her. Some were to Cassandra, some to unknown recipients. But one bundle, tied in green twine, was different. Every envelope bore the same address, a boarding school in Portugal. The addressee, Mr. H.F., he opened one, dated 2007. Henry, I know you believe the past was buried, but Marleycombe remembers you. I remember. You can't undo what happened to Jeremy. But you can stop hiding from it. The longer you pretend you weren't there, the more the hall will whisper your name. I am coming home. I think you know why. Blanc exhaled slowly. So Henry hadn't vanished into nothing. He'd been sent away, and Eleanor had written to him for years, demanding not reconciliation, but truth, which meant. He pulled his phone and called Inspector Hanley. I need immigration records, he said, for one Henry Ferrers. Sent to Portugal sometime in the late 1990s, possibly under another surname. Hanley grumbled, but agreed. As Blanc waited, he returned to the photograph. Henry's face was all bone and stare, the kind of child too quiet to be innocent, too watchful to be naive. It wasn't just that he looked troubled, it was that he looked dangerous. There had been 2 children on the staircase that night. And now one was buried. And the other, if he was truly back, had just killed again. Blanc returned the boxes, carefully, and left the library. The house seemed darker. Now, as if the truth pressed in on the walls, like water behind glass. Jeremy had died. Eleanor had been silenced. And Henry Ferrers, the boy in the photograph, had returned to a house that never forgot. Chapter 13. The Man in the Portrait Inspector. Hanley was not a man easily rattled, but the voice on the other end of the line that evening held a new edge of urgency. We've found something, he told Blanc, and I'm not sure you'll like it. Blanc sat in the rose and thistles upstairs lounge, where he'd taken to pacing in the evenings. Rain lashed against the old windows, and the fire in the hearth had gone down to a soft orange glow. Tell me, Blanc said, phone to his ear. Portuguese authorities confirmed it. Hanley said, there was a Henry Ferrers enrolled at a school in Coimbra under the name Enrique Duarte, registered by a family trustee, left the country 3 years ago. No forwarding address. Did he return to England? No immigration stamp, Hanley said. But if he flew private, or came by sea, we wouldn't know. So it's possible, Hanley exhaled. Likely. There was a bank account linked to him, closed 6 weeks ago. The address used was a cottage on Primrose Lane. Blanc froze. Primrose Lane was in Marleycombe. A short, Winding road of 4 houses. I'll meet you there, Blanc said. By the time they reached the property, number 11 Primrose Lane, the rain had slowed to a mist, but the wind still curled sharply off the hills. The house was quiet, curtains drawn. No car in the drive. Hanley knocked. No answer. I'll have to request a warrant. Blanc stepped forward and tried the door. It creaked open. Hanley gave him a withering look. You're insufferable. You? May thank me later. The interior was spare. Not abandoned, cleared, surfaces wiped. Furniture minimal. Someone had prepared to leave. But upstairs, in the small study, they found what they needed. A single item on the desk. A photograph. Old. Grainy. Enlarged. It showed the front of Marleycombe Hall. 3 children on the steps. Eleanor, in a white smock. A boy who could only be Jeremy, smaller, face half turned. And a 3rd child, taller, older, darker. Henry. There was no mistaking the eyes. Blanc picked up the frame, his expression unreadable. On the back was a label, written in faded ink. Eleanor, Jeremy, Henry, summer 1997. 1 is gone. 1 is buried. 1 still walks. Hanley looked over his shoulder. You think he's been here the whole time? I think, Blanc said slowly, that Eleanor never stopped seeing him. He haunted her, not as a ghost, but as a possibility. As a danger. He turned to Hanley. Tell me, the morning Eleanor died, who was first to discover the body? Rosie Trent. The gardener's niece? Yes, lives in the cottage behind the hall. Blanc's mind was already shifting. The girl's face, anxious, pale, too fast to speak, too quick to leave. I need to speak to her. Now. They found Rosie in her aunt's cottage, curled on the sofa, tea untouched on the table. She stood when they entered, visibly nervous. Mr. Blanc, Inspector, what's wrong? You found the body, Blanc said calmly. You told us you entered through the garden gate. Yes, I came early, like always. Miss Eleanor liked her tea before 8. And you went in day. Back? Yes. Did you see anyone else? Hear anything? She hesitated. No one. Blanc stepped forward, soft but certain. Rosie, listen to me. You are not in danger, but I believe you saw someone. I believe you've been afraid to say so. Tears welled suddenly in her eyes. I didn't know who he was, she whispered. Not at first. He was in the upstairs hall. He looked like he belonged there. I thought he was family. Blanc's voice dropped. And he saw you? She nodded. He just turned and went down the stairs, calm, like nothing had happened. Describe him. Tall, pale, dark eyes, black coat. There was something wrong with his face, like he hadn't slept in weeks. Did Eleanor speak of him before her death? She said someone had come back, but she wouldn't say who. Blanc turned to Hanley. We have our man. Hanley sighed. Do we have proof? Blanc looked again at the photograph. The boy's eyes staring through time, through silence, through guilt. We will. That night, as Marleycombe sank into darkness again, Blanc sat in his room and stared out the window toward the hall. Somewhere, maybe in the woods, maybe in the attic, a man who had once been a boy was watching. A man with old blood in his, veins and newer blood on his hands. Henry Farrar. Chapter 14. The Night Visitor. The moon was low and warped behind clouds when Benoit Blanc heard the knock. 3 soft taps. No more. He opened the door of his room at the Rose and Thistle slowly, cautiously, only to find no one there, but on the floor, resting against the doorframe, was a package. A slim envelope wrapped in brown paper and bound with twine. No label, no stamp, No handwriting. Inside, a single photograph, a newspaper clipping, and a note typed on thin card. He studied. The photograph first black and white, slightly curled. A group of children standing before a garden wall, the edge of Marleycombe Hall just visible behind them. There was Jeremy again, unmistakably him, laughing mid-motion. Eleanor beside him. And a third child, the same boy, Henry, but not just a child anymore, the jaw sharper, the eyes harder. He looked 12 or 13, and in the corner of the photo, nearly hidden, was something else. A fourth figure, half out of frame. A man, watching. The newspaper clipping was small and yellowing. Local youth sent abroad after incident at school. The Ferris family declined to comment on the circumstances that led to the sudden departure of young Henry F., who was removed from a prestigious boarding school earlier this month. Sources cite a violent disagreement and disciplinary review, dated March 1998, just 6 weeks after Jeremy's death. The note, typed in small, perfect font, read, "You're getting close. He won't stop until the hall is clean again." Not of dirt, of memory. No signature. Blank set the pieces out on the table, side by side. Someone was helping him now, perhaps a quiet ally. Someone else who remembered, and who feared what Henry had become. But why now? Because Eleanor had threatened to reveal him. Because Henry, who had been erased from history, was now reappearing in photographs, letters, memories. Eleanor had tried to unbury the past, and Henry had buried her. Blank stood and paced the room. There was a pattern to all of it. Eleanor's death, the vanished records, the staircase, and there, in his mind, was a single, brilliant, terrible thought. Henry had never truly left Marleycombe. Yes, the record said Portugal. Yes, there were letters sent abroad. But what if that was the lie? What if Henry had been hidden, not across seas, but within walls? What if he had been at Marleycombe Hall, all along? At dawn, Blank stood before the hall's eastern facade, where the sun broke in low streaks through the orchard mist. The house stood quietly, like a sleeping creature. He walked the perimeter once, slowly, thoughtfully. Then he stopped near the servants' wing, beside the disused coal chute. There, behind a half-rotted trellis, was a narrow door, painted over, rusted at the hinges, but a door nonetheless. With effort, Blank forced it open. The air beyond was damp and sour. He turned on his flashlight and stepped inside. Stone steps led downward, not toward the cellar, but deeper, beneath the hall's original foundations, into space no blueprint ever mentioned, a place added or concealed. The corridor narrowed, brick and earth and mildew. Then a doorway. Blank stepped through, and there in the shadows was a room, crude, cramped, a cot, a desk, a chair, tin cans, a radio, a copy of Wuthering Heights, spine broken, and scrawled across the wall in black marker, "Jeremy was never meant to stay, but I did." Blank stared in horror. A hiding place, a prison, or a nest. Henry hadn't fled Marleycombe. He'd retreated into it. And now, after all these years, he'd emerged. The ghost in the attic, the figure on the stairs, the child who was never punished. Blank turned, suddenly aware of just how alone he was. And behind him, faint, deliberate, he heard the soft creak of footsteps. Chapter 15. The man in the dark blonde didn't move. Not yet. The sound, that soft creak of a floorboard shifting beneath deliberate weight, had come from just outside the narrow entry behind him. The underground room seemed to constrict around him. The low ceiling, the stale air, the writings on the wall. It all felt suddenly alive with memory and menace. Another step. Then silence. He turned slowly, Flashlight in hand, the doorway was empty, but the corridor beyond was now darker than before, as if something or someone stood just beyond the reach of light. "Henry?" Blanc called, his voice calm, even "No." Response: "I believe we must talk, sir. Not as enemies, as men. As the final witnesses to a tragedy both of us were born into." Still nothing. Then a low voice, cracked by disuse. "You don't understand the hall?" Blanc remained still. "Then help me." A shadow shifted at the edge of the corridor. "They lied about me. My father, my uncle, even Eleanor. They said I was sick, but I wasn't. I saw things they didn't want seen." Blanc kept his gaze steady. "What did you see?" "The way they treated Jeremy, as if he were shame in a child's skin. I tried to protect him." A pause, then, "But he wouldn't listen. You were on the staircase that day. He wanted to slide down the banister. Said he could make it to the bottom. I told him not to. Another step in the dark. Closer. He laughed. He said I was always afraid. Said the hall had made me soft. And then? A breath. He slipped. I swear to you, he slipped. And Eleanor? She saw me standing there. She thought I pushed him. And from that day on, she hated me for it." Blanc's voice softened. "Is that why you stayed hidden all these years? They would have destroyed me, sent me away again. Eleanor wrote those letters, but she never meant forgiveness. She wanted me to confess. And so you killed her." Silence. Then a bitter laugh. Low, strange, barely human. "I didn't come back to kill her. I never left. I watched her grow. I heard her music every night. I saw her fingers tremble when she played the last bars. I knew she remembered. She was going to tell," Blanc said gently. "That's why she returned. To finish what the staircase began. She said she'd show the village who I really was. That I'd never be free. That the hall would always know. And so you proved her right." A long silence. "I didn't mean to push her. She confronted me on the stairs. Said she was going to the police. Said the attic was full of proof. I just grabbed her arm." Blanc closed his eyes for a moment. She fell backwards. "Like Jeremy. Same sound, same silence. And you left her at the bottom, just like him." The voice faded. "I am the only one left. The hall belongs to me now." Blanc took a slow step forward. "Henry, listen to me. Come out. Come with." There is still a way to end this with truth." Silence. Then, "The hall doesn't want truth. The hall wants silence." And then, footsteps retreating quickly into the dark dot. Blanc followed, turning into the corridor, but the figure had gone, vanished into the maze of stone and soil beneath the house. He stood still, breathing hard. Henry Ferrars was alive. He was not a ghost. He was a man made by silence, hiding within the very bones of the house. And now, with the truth known, he would vanish again unless Benoit Blanc found a way to bring him into the light permanently. Above ground, dawn was breaking again, but beneath the staircase, the real shadows remained, and the man who had once been a boy stood somewhere in the walls waiting. Watching. Chapter 16. Traps and Echoes. By noon the next day, the clouds above Marley Combe hung like bruises. The wind had turned colder, and the village square sat mostly empty. Word was spreading, quiet, speculative, that Inspector Hanley and Benoit Blanc were closing in on something. The rose and thistle's hearth roared. Blanc sat opposite Hanley at a small table scattered with maps of the hall's foundations, including one drawn by hand, a crude sketch of the hidden substructure beneath the servant's wing, which Blanc had recreated from memory. "Half of this isn't in any blueprint," Hanley said, frowning. "That's the point," Blanc replied. "This was a house designed to hide things, Not just valuables, but people. Generations of the Ferrers family buried their regrets in its walls. Henry was simply the last one to go in. Hanley tapped a pencil on the diagram. But we still don't know where he is now. You said he slipped away from you. Blanc nodded. Into the shadows? He knows that underground better than I. Ooh, maybe even better than the architects did, Hanley muttered. We need to force his hand, Blanc said quietly. Draw him out. Hanley glanced at him. How? Blanc looked toward the window, where the outline of Marleycombe Hall rose through the mist. By using what he fears most. That evening, the plan was set into motion. Cassandra Bloom returned to the hall for the first time since Eleanor's death. She walked its halls like a returning queen, guarded, poised, unsentimental. Hanley had protested, but she agreed readily. I've lived with Ferrer's blood long enough, she said. Might as well put it to use. They left the front, door ajar, and lit every lamp in the house. Blanc and Hanley remained hidden, one upstairs in the attic, the other in the library corridor. A microphone was concealed beneath a chair cushion. Another in the stair rail. Cassandra sat in the drawing room, facing the open staircase. On her lap, a leather-bound volume of Eleanor's music. Jeremy, Henry, Eleanor, it ends tonight, she said clearly, letting the words echo into the stairwell. She flipped the page. Her voice was calm. You are not forgotten. You were buried, and now your name will be spoken. I'll make sure of it. The house was silent. Then, faintly, a creak from above. Hanley stiffened. Blanc, from the attic stairwell, closed his eyes. One step, then another. Too slow for panic. Too steady for a passerby. Cassandra didn't flinch. She looked directly. At the landing. You think the house belongs to you. But it never did. It belongs to the truth now. A sudden rush of footsteps. Fast. Heavy. Hanley burst from the corridor, just as a dark figure lunged from the upper landing. Henry Ferrers, Hanley shouted. Don't move. But Henry was already retreating, away from the stairs, through the hallway toward the servants' side. Blanc sprinted downward, then around, cutting through the kitchen and toward the narrow trellis door. For a moment, all was still. Then, crack. A floorboard splintered behind the pantry wall. Blanc turned and caught him. Henry Ferrers stood half-crouched behind a panel door, eyes wild, face pale with sweat, his coat torn. His mouth opened, then closed. Don't, Blanc said gently. Don't run any more. Henry stared at him. It wasn't murder. Not really. Blanc took a step forward. You didn't mean to kill Jeremy. Maybe not even Eleanor. But you did. And now it's time to step into the light. Henry sagged. For a moment, he looked small again. That same boy from the photographs. That same shadow in Eleanor's memories. Hanley appeared at the opposite end of the hallway. It was over. Henry Ferrers raised his hands. And just like that, the hall exhaled. Back in the drawing room. Cassandra set the music book aside. Blanc returned to her, slightly breathless. You were brave, he said. Old, she replied. And I've been waiting for that man to face himself since I was 15. They sat together in silence for a moment. Cassandra glanced at the staircase. It's strange, she said. I always thought the hall hated me. But I think it just wanted someone to listen. Blanc nodded slowly. Even houses grow tired of silence. As Henry Ferrers was led away through the front doors of Marleycombe Hall, the lamps flickered slightly. The storm had passed, and for the first time in decades, the great spiral staircase stood still. No voices. No falls. No shadows watching from above. Just wood and light, and a silence that no longer needed to hide anything. Chapter 17. Confession in the attic. The storm had rolled away, leaving the air in Marleycombe fresh and strangely weightless, as though the village had, at last, exhaled a breath it hadn't known it was holding. But Benoit Blanc's work was not yet done. Henry Ferrers sat in a holding room at the small regional station, not in handcuffs, not under arrest, but surrounded by the walls he had once chosen. Over the world. His expression was empty. His eyes focused on nothing. Blanc entered alone. Henry didn't look up. "It's very quiet now, isn't it?" Blanc said, taking the chair opposite him. Henry blinked. "I thought it would feel different." "What did you think it would feel like?" Henry gave the faintest shrug. "Relief, or maybe freedom. Neither tends to follow a life built in shadows." Henry said nothing. Blanc placed a folder gently on the table between them. "Do you know what this is?" Henry glanced. "The file on Jeremy?" "No," Blanc said quietly. "It's Eleanor's, her notes, her letters, the music she composed, all of it circling the moment your lives changed." Still no reaction. "She didn't hate you, Henry," Blanc continued. "She feared you, not because you were cruel, because you reminded her of what she couldn't fix. You reminded her of that night. I didn't push him. You didn't need to. You were there." She screamed because she knew what the world would think. That one strange boy had caused the death of another. Henry leaned forward. "She screamed my name. That's the last thing I heard before the fall. I couldn't forget it. For years, I tried to tell myself I hadn't heard it." Blanc nodded, slowly, and when she returned, she threatened to bring it all back. "I asked her to stop. I warned her. But she wouldn't let it go, because she believed that silence was the true sin." Henry looked away. She was probably right. Blanc tapped the folder. "Why stay in the house? All these years. Why not disappear completely?" "I don't know," Henry said. "Maybe I was waiting for her to come back. Maybe I wanted to see if she'd forgive me. Or I wanted her to punish me. She never could," Blanc said softly. "And that was your final cruelty." Henry looked up, surprised. "You let her carry the guilt of that night while you hid behind the walls." A long silence passed. Then Henry whispered, "I thought if I disappeared, the house would forget." "But houses remember," Blanc replied. "Especially ones as old and broken as that." Henry lowered his eyes. "What happens now?" Blanc sat back. "That depends on whether you want to be remembered as the ghost, or as the man who finally spoke." Later that evening, with a signed confession in hand, Inspector Hanley confirmed charges would be filed. Involuntary manslaughter for Eleanor's death. No statute of limitations could shield him now. The cause of Jeremy Wright's death, however, would remain officially accidental. There were no living witnesses, no physical evidence, just grief and secrets and an old winding staircase. In the public eye, the truth would emerge. Marleycombe would whisper a different story now. Before leaving the village, Blanc returned to the attic one final time. The old space still held Eleanor's piano, still smelled of dust and rosewood. He sat at the stool, placed his fingers gently on the keys, and played the unfinished lullaby marked 4J. The missing final bars had been found among her scattered notes. They were simple, soft, peaceful. He played them slowly, letting the last note fade into stillness. It was not triumph. It was not justice. But it was an ending. At long last. Chapter 18. The things we leave behind. Marleycombe Hall stood quiet in the golden hush of late afternoon, the kind of light that seems to gild even sorrow. The ivy curled thickly over the east wing. Crows traced lazy arcs over the orchard. For the first time in decades, the windows of the hall were all uncovered, nothing left to hide. Inside, a slow, careful process was underway. Eleanor's belongings were being catalogued by a solicitor from Exeter. Cassandra supervised, her presence both practical and oddly ceremonial, like someone attending the dismantling of an altar. She moved slowly, her eyes not always on what she packed, but rather on the shadows those things left behind. Blanc had returned once more. At Cassandra's invitation, "There's something you ought to see," she told him. Now, he followed her down a narrow service corridor at the back of the hall, one that hadn't been used since the early 90s, its walls still lined with faded wallpaper and tarnished hooks. At the end was a small door, locked. She handed him a key. Eleanor kept this shut for 30 years, even after the rest of the house was opened again. Blanc unlocked it and pushed the door inward. A child's room, untouched. A narrow bed, still made with a faded red blanket. A shelf of books, The Wind in the Willows, A Wrinkle in Time, several dog-eared paperbacks with dragons on the cover. On the far wall, above a toy chest, hung a poster of a 1996 football squad. Jeremy's room. Blanc stepped inside. The air smelled of dust and time. On the windowsill sat a stone, smooth and gray, with a boy's scribbled name inked in felt. "Pen, J. Eleanor cleaned it," Cassandra said from behind him. "Every week, even after she moved to London. She made the housekeeper keep the dust out, just in this one room." She was trying to keep him alive, Blanc murmured, in the only way left. Cassandra stepped forward and placed something gently on the desk, a small photo frame. Eleanor and Jeremy. Smiling, he had toothpaste on his chin. She was laughing. She loved him more than the family knew how to understand, Cassandra said softly. "More than I did, if I'm honest. I resented him at first. I thought he'd taken all her light. But she gave it to him freely." Blanc nodded. "And she paid for it." "Do you think she forgave Henry?" Blanc didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked at the room, the colors, the memories, sealed into wood and cotton and paper. "I think she tried to," he said finally. "But some wounds refuse stitching, and some ghosts choose to stay." They stood in silence for a while. Outside the window, the sun sank lower across the orchard. The light touched the trees in gold. A single crow passed overhead. "Will you sell the hall?" Blanc asked. Cassandra hesitated. "No," she said, "not yet." "Because of Eleanor?" She shook her head. "Because of me. I need to decide whether I'm strong enough to live in a place that remembers everything." Blanc looked at her carefully. "Then start by opening doors." That night, in the Rose and Thistles dining room, Blanc wrote his notes by the fire, sipping weak tea and listening to the ticking of the old grandfather clock behind him. He had received word that Henry Ferrars had been transferred to a psychiatric holding facility pending trial. The papers in London had already begun their slow, speculative descent into scandal. He ignored them. This was not a story for headlines. This was a story for the quiet places, the in-between spaces, the echoing stairs and locked bedrooms and children no one had known how to love. And for a woman who had written music in silence, hoping the notes would outlast the ghosts, they had. Marleycombe Hall would sleep easier now. In its bones, in the grain of its stairs, in the dust between its walls, the truth would always remain, because somehow. Chapter 19. Whispers beneath the oak. The inquest into Eleanor. Ferrars' death was held at the small courthouse in Marleycombe, a relic of red brick and weather-worn stone tucked beside the old parish hall. Only a handful of villagers were permitted inside. The rest gathered outside under a gray sky that threatened, but never quite delivered. Rain. Benoit Blanc arrived alone and unhurried, dressed plainly, without flourish. He took a seat in the back, near the carved wood rail, and said nothing for most of the morning. The coroner's report confirmed the fall. The medical examiner described the fatal blow, a fractured skull, consistent with the curved base of the lower stair risers. No sign of struggle beyond a bruised wrist. No defensive wounds. No one needed to testify to the staircase's age, or its treachery. Everyone in the room had walked it at least once in their lives. They knew its creaks, its dips, its tendency to punish those not paying close attention. But they also knew Eleanor, and they knew she didn't fall. Not by accident. Cassandra Bloom took the stand quietly. Her testimony was short, precise. She confirmed Eleanor's plans, that she had intended to speak publicly about her family, about what had happened to Jeremy, that she was afraid in her final weeks, that she believed someone was watching her. She didn't say his name out loud. Cassandra said softly, "But I knew." Then the final evidence was presented. A signed statement from Henry Ferrars. A full confession. No bravado. No escape. The room held its breath as the magistrate read the final line aloud. I tried to forget him. And when she wouldn't let me, I tried to silence her too. But I was never free, not even when the house swallowed me whole. The coroner declared the death unlawful. The court satisfied. There was no applause. Only stillness. The kind of stillness that comes after a long illness has finally ended. Afterward, Blanc wandered the grounds of Marleycombe Hall one last time. The grass was wet beneath his soles. The orchard stood solemn in the distance, the leaves beginning their slow autumn fade. He came to rest beneath the old oak at the edge of the grounds, the same tree Jeremy had once climbed. According to Eleanor's letters, a tire swing still hung there, its rope frayed but intact. In the soil beneath it sat a small, flat stone. Unmarked. Recently placed. He knelt and touched it gently. "It should have had your name," he whispered. "And your story." Behind him, Cassandra's voice carried softly. "We'll carve one." He rose as she approached. "I thought you might be on a train by now," she said. "I don't leave quickly," Blanc said. "Not when a place has bled so long," Cassandra nodded. "You'll write it down?" "Parts of it, not all." "Some things belong to the soil," he said. "Some truths are not for the world, just for those who listen." They stood together beneath the oak, the tire swing shifting lazily in the wind. Then Cassandra handed him a slip of paper, a music sheet. The final bars of the lullaby, newly rewritten. "You changed the ending," Blanc said, surprised. "No," she replied. "I finished it." That night, Benoit Blanc boarded the late train to London. As the fields rolled past, he sat in silence, hands folded on the music sheet in his lap. The notes on the page shimmered faintly in the overhead light. The lullaby now ended in a major key. Not joyful, but peaceful. Resolved. And in that moment, he felt, perhaps for the first time since he stepped into Marleycombe, that the staircase had truly come to rest. Chapter 20. The letter no one sent a week past. Marleycombe returned to its slow rhythm. Church bells on Sunday, milk bottles on doorsteps, gossip murmured over hedges. The hall stood unchanged in silhouette, but lighter somehow, less oppressive, as if the air around it had finally cleared. Most of the villagers had stopped talking about Eleanor Ferrars, about Jeremy, about Henry. They wanted to forget, but not. Everyone did. Benoit Blanc, now back in London, sat in the corner of a quiet tea-house in Marylebone. Rain streaked the windows. The city moved outside without urgency. In front of him was a small parcel, wrapped in brown paper, forwarded from Cassandra Bloom. He opened it gently. Inside, a letter, unsent, undated, but unmistakably written by Eleanor. Her handwriting neat but pressed hard into the paper, the pen having almost torn through in places. To whom it may one day concern, they say time softens pain. I've learned it only dulls the edges. What happened in this house, in my house, was not just a tragedy. It was a consequence of pride, of silence, of fear. Jeremy died because we turned our faces away. Henry was exiled because we refused to understand him. And I carried the guilt of both. If you are reading this, it means I have finally done what I always said I would, told the truth. Not to punish Henry, not even to exonerate myself, but because I could no longer bear the weight of a lie built into the staircase of this house. Marleycombe Hall will never be innocent. But perhaps, if it remembers what happened within it, it might finally become honest. Truth, like music, only lives when played aloud. E.F. Blanc folded the letter slowly. There was nothing more to add. The truth, fragmented, painful, incomplete, had finally emerged. Not perfectly, not neatly, but truth never does. It arrives like fog, slowly, all at once, revealing things half hidden and long denied. He slipped the letter into his coat, and for the first time since Eleanor's fall, he felt a kind of quiet finality, not the triumph of a case solved, but the closing of a wound. Later that afternoon, as Blanc prepared to leave the tea-house, the waiter handed him a second envelope, smaller, cream-colored, with only his name on the front. Inside was a card. The front bore a painting, Marleycombe Hall, bathed in gold light. The back, in Cassandra Bloom's elegant hand, read, "Thank you for listening, for not rushing the silence, for hearing what we buried. No signature. Just a final line of music, the last 3 notes of Eleanor's lullaby. Do. Re-soul. Resolution. Outside. London moved." But within Benoit Blanc, Marleycombe remained, not as mystery, not even as memory, but as something stranger, a place, with a past